Good morning, y'all, and welcome to the Mercury Morning News. My name is Ben Nguyen. I'm the current opinion editor for the Mercury, and I'm sitting here with...
I'm Patricia Matthew. I'm a staff reporter, and I've been with the Mercury for about a year and a half now.
All right.
And today we're going to be walking through some of the top stories from our most recent edition, and also an opinion piece. So stick around as we sort of go through these stories. We'll be talking about tuition and if you can expect any tuition prices to be lowered.
The answer is probably no.
We have an opinion piece from one of our columnists who is raising some really important and interesting questions about if UTD is ready to open up in the fall and comparing us to where other universities are.
The answer to that is also probably no.
There's a story about international graduate students who just graduated in May and sort of the challenges that they're facing financially as they're trying to get jobs, and also some of the legal challenges they have with their immigration.
That's just going to be us two talking, since it's her story. And then we're going to be talking to Nandika, who put out a public survey, and we can dive into how the process kind of works on that for the Mercury and talk about what students are kind of thinking about going back to university and whether or not they actually really want to in the current climate. And then finally today, we'll be going over some music news with our radio friends. Today we'll be having Jonathan Stewart on, the local music director at Radio UTD, to talk about China Club's latest album, Ming and Qi Qi.
And really our goal here is to pull back the curtain and sort of show you a little bit about our journalistic process and what goes into these stories. So we're going to be interviewing the reporters who are breaking these news stories and sort of learning about how they go about pitching, sourcing, writing, and editing their pieces. But the Mercury has tons of stories online all the time. This is really just the surface level. So if you ever want to look more, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or on our website.
At the utdmercury.com. And don't forget at the end, as well, we've got our friends from Radio UTD. Go give them a follow. Go check out their website, radioutd.com, and follow them across the social media board at Radio UTD. And with that, today, we'll be taking you on a trip through the Mercury. We're going to start off today with a piece from Alina Hassan about tuition. Hello, everybody. Welcome back, or just welcome to the Mercury Morning News. We're covering Alina's story about tuition and how it's probably not going to go down. This is the last one we recorded for the day, but due to the powers that be, it's the first one that y'all are going to be listening to today. So, Alina, tuition, how is it going to change, if at all?
So based on the town hall, it sounds like tuition is not going to change. Something interesting that the Vice President of Budget and Finance, Terry Pankrit, was saying was that the budget is affected by the number of enrollment because tuition is a really large source of revenue for the university. So if less students enroll, they have an incentive to, start cutting costs. But in terms of tuition, it seems like since President Benson said in a statement that he does not want to start cutting any staff or start cutting costs or doing furloughs or anything. The only way they can maintain that is if they keep tuition the same.
Right. And
I'm curious, like, I'm a student, you're a student. How can we not want tuition to be lowered? Like, can you sort of give the argument for why, we're getting less things, right? If we're taking online classes, why is it still important that the university isn't budging on this issue?
So something that I came across was actually a lot of universities have the same thing where the cost of tuition isn't changing. And we saw something in the summer where there was a waiver around $255 for students. And that was not based off of the fact that students were doing distance learning or remote learning. It was due to the fact that the fees that were refunded to them were for the gym, recreation, medical services, but the cost of instruction stays the same. So that's the major thing here, is that the tuition is staying the same because they're saying the cost of instruction is still the same. And so if we do end up getting a refund, it'll probably be for the same thing in the summer, where it's just like transportation fee, athletics fee, gym, like facility fee.
Yeah, I gotcha. So, all right, what was it? What are some of the dangers, I guess, of then lowering tuition? Like, let's say we get our way. The students, they rise up, they're like, hey, I'm not about this. We're gonna pop on out of here. So let's say they cave in and they go like, all right, we're gonna lower tuition by, let's say like 10-20% or something like that. What do you think happens then?
I think what happens is that if they start cutting, if they start lowering tuition, they're going to have to start cutting costs. And something that we may see is that they may start cutting jobs on campus, or if they do, they might lower the wages. So people like staff, facility, they might start getting lower wages. And I know that's not something they want to do, but we might see that. I know UT Austin, I believe, said that they're cutting their tuition by 50% in the fall, I believe. And I know just today, Princeton University said they're reducing their tuition by 10%. But it looks like UTD is not doing that because we don't like have that, you know, like that large of an, I guess, an endowment, I guess is what it is that UT Austin has such a huge, like way more money coming in. They have way more students than we have. And because of that, it may make more sense for them to be able to do that. But for UTD, in order to sustain and offer all of its current services, maybe they can't do a 50% cut, but maybe it may be more reasonable to ask for like a 10%. But again, that's something they haven't announced yet. They've just said that they're looking into it, and when we get closer to the semester, closer to August, they're probably gonna come out with a statement.
That's interesting, like the different universities having different amounts of cushion. Like it makes sense, but I just hadn't thought about that before. I really liked in your article, you have these like percentages of how much your tuition is going to these different places, which I think would be really interesting for readers because, you know, we're paying this tuition, but people don't necessarily know where it's going. Can you talk a little bit about like where you found these numbers and maybe some of the more surprising ones that you found?
For sure. So for me, where I got the numbers was mostly through reaching out to the Office of Financial Aid, because I looked through some of the available information online, but I couldn't find any like super specific numbers. So I had to reach out to them, and then I got a response. And I think something really interesting to me is that 24% of tuition goes towards scholarships and stipends. And I think we also have a lot of 4 full ride scholarships that I know of for students. And I know one of the things that makes UTD stand out is that they have these like very generous scholarships. And so that sort of raises the question if, like, again, as Ben was saying, if you lower the tuition, what happens? So another thing that could happen is that if you lower tuition, you're going to have less money for scholarships. And before any of this, like the pandemic started, the AES scholarship was actually cut. Now, it's before any of this happened. So now the question is raised, if we do lower tuition, will it be cut further? And because of that, will you have students not consider UTD students who maybe were only interested because of the scholarship or the financial aid packages. Now we're going to say, I'm going to go to a different college that's more affordable, because again, UTD is the most, it's very pricey for a public university in Texas. I believe it's the most expensive one. And so the reason some students can come here is because of those, the scholarships and the financial aid. So I think that'll be pretty interesting to see, because there are lots of different alternatives for students if they don't want to come to UTD. So that's something to look out for, I think.
All right, I gotcha. All right, well, you heard it here first. 24% of all of your money is going directly to me. Thank you very much. Very much appreciate it. No.
No, when I read that too, like again, my jaw like actually dropped. I was like, oh my goodness, that's so crazy. I'm like curious, this is like more of a philosophical question, so you don't necessarily need to have an answer, but what you were just talking about got me thinking. There's so many ways that a university can operate. Like it can operate as a for-profit business. It can operate as a place where it's trying to like do a service, you know, by like giving, I don't know, scholarships to underprivileged students. It could be like trying to build up its elite status because we're still a young university. So how do you think UTD is operating, and do you think that they're doing a good job? Sort of open-ended.
Yeah, I think UTD has, over the past few years, sort of crept up the radar because it's been attracting a lot of, you know, quality students, a lot of high talent students. And there's no evidence to back this up that I have on me. But I think a really big incentive that students have to come here is actually those scholarships, because, you know, tuition college just in general is so expensive. It's pretty rare to come across a full ride scholarship, let alone four, that you can apply for. So I think what UTD has sort of done is use the scholarships to sort of attract a pool of talented students and build their brand and build their reputation through these students, through the work that they do, through the research that they do, and invest in these students. I think that's been their strategy thus far. You know, besides that, I'm not really sure what else like there is. I guess that's my main thing that I noticed, is that it's the scholarships is what really differentiates them, because when you look at their ranking and stuff, like their like status as like a research university, which recently I think in the past year or so there was something about UTD became recognized as like a top, as like one of the like a higher tier research university, but that comes from, you know, the students. And so I think what they're really trying to do is invest in the students, and that's why you see almost a quarter of tuition goes back into scholarships. Do students know this and like this? I don't know.
All right, well, thank you very much for hopping on the show with us today, Elena. And coming up next, what is up next? Coming up next, we've got Snipta coming in to talk about why UTD isn't actually ready to reopen. And they're paying, and y'all are paying me 20% of your tuition for no reason whatsoever. Stick around, stay tuned. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Mercury Morning News. Right now, we're sitting with Snipta Malik. She's one of our opinion columnists, because we have actually more than just news at the newspaper. We do have a wide range of opinion articles of various people's opinions into the state of the world today, yesterday, and tomorrow. Snipta just wrote an article about how Texas is not ready to reopen, and how UTD specifically is not ready to reopen. And so, as Snipta is starting off, just give us a general overview of the arguments you brought up, why UTD isn't ready for any sort of physical classes at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, during the pandemic, we've been seeing a lot of, like being in Texas, we've seen a lot of how our government has been handling the crisis. And I was really surprised to see the way that Texas has approached like addressing coronavirus. And because of some of the problems that I saw, I wondered, is UTD really ready to reopen considering all these different faults we have in our state policies? So in my specific paper, I focused on 3 specific arguments. The first being lax mask enforcement. At the government level, like Texas has really changed its mind on how they're going to enforce masks and stuff like that. And then the second argument that I focused on was mask enforcement, and then delays in test reporting. So I saw a news article where turnaround times for tests were taking like multiple days, and I was wondering, like, how is it that if Texas as a state is not like delivering test results on time, is UTD going to be able to do the same? And the last thing I was looking at was contact tracers. So Texas has failed in reaching its goal of hiring enough contact tracers and these are essentially people who are hired to, if someone's infected, they'll call them every single day, ask them, who have you been talking to, what locations have you visited? And that way they can contact other people who may have possibly gotten exposed to coronavirus. So these are sort of the 3 arguments that I focused on, mostly analyzing them at the state level and looking at how they would impact UTD's policies on campus in the fall.
Right.
I would love, sorry, Ben. I would love to pick your brain on the first point that you brought up, the mask enforcement. So the Mercury publishes during the summer on a 3-week cycle. So when you pitched this story, Texas had a very lax mask policy, and very, very recently, we've sort of seen Governor Abbott like change in his ways. How did you approach this as a writer, like staying up to date with changing news?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with coronavirus, like everything changes so quickly, and especially in Texas, I think the cycle that I was writing this piece, this cases just spiked very, very suddenly to like 8,000 cases a day. So when the mask policy actually changed, I had actually submitted my article the night before, and Ben messaged me the next day, and he was like, "Hey, so there's actually been an update. Could you like really quickly edit the paragraph that's talking about the mask enforcement policies?" And basically, the way I approached it is that in the end, it doesn't matter how the mask enforcement policy changed. The fact of the matter is that one, Texas has not been consistent in the way that they're approaching this problem. And the second fact of the matter is that UTD has not said anything about how they're going to approach this matter in a consistent way either. So those 2 facts still remain the same. And so when it came to editing the piece, it was really just a change in like a couple of sentences because there are still all these questions that are left unanswered.
I gotcha. So so UTD's not ready to open right now. What do you think could change to make it possible for UTD to reopen? Possible at all?
I honestly think that I think one key critical component to reopening UTD will be having testing sites on campus. Because a lot of students who are coming into the fall are most likely going to be freshmen who may not necessarily have transportation, or maybe just an elaboration of how they're going to make sure the students are going to get tested. And this can happen in 2 ways. Either they provide more access to testing on campus, or they have a policy of doing pool testing, where they'll consistently test students or groups of students on a regular basis to make sure that there isn't an infection on campus. So I think that will be one prerequisite. The larger prerequisite will be maybe having a vaccine or an effective treatment for coronavirus. That way, if a student gets sick, or maybe a student can get vaccinated, that would be a really great way of making sure that campus is ready to reopen. But I think in reality, coronavirus is something that's going to stay with us for a very long time. And it's really just we're going to have to think more less individualistically and more on the community base. So making sure we're watching out for community members, making sure we're wearing masks, sanitizing, being really diligent about how we're interacting with people and how making sure that we're social distancing. Because ultimately, if we do not observe these practices, then a case could spike on campus, and that would put so many students at risk.
In your article, you talk about this idea of social pressure. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean when you use the term social pressure?
Yeah, so this argument was made in response to how UTD is enforcing mask wearing on campus, and our administrators were really relying on this idea of social pressure, meaning students are like us are going to take on the responsibility of reminding those around us to wear masks or social distance. And I think the problem with that is that it deflects the responsibility onto us, rather than making it something that administrators should be taking care of, or maybe administrators should be keeping students more accountable to their actions. So the idea of social pressure is that, you know, we, like us as students, we are supposed to keep each other accountable, which is fair. I think that's a reasonable argument, but I think that should be supported by more stricter policies that maybe like fine students for not wearing masks, or maybe fine students for not social distancing, or things like that.
Right. So let's do a theoretical here. So because there isn't really all that much to work with. But let's say UTD, they've already said in the most recent presidential town hall, and if you missed that, you can catch it on UTD's YouTube channel. Check out the transcripts on the Mercury website. But President Benson did say that he wanted to make sure campus was safer, or as safe as you might be at home, because he recognized that you have all these people living in dorms, they're living in UV and stuff. So already they already have apartments set up as self-quarantine, right? Let's say because Abbott's latest order allowed counties and local governments to fine as a punishment for not wearing masks. Let's say UTD now has fine enforcement for masks, similar to parking, similar to late fees and other things. And they're able to have testing at the student health center, because they did say they would have at least some testing availability at the student health center. Do you think that makes it tenable? Or is it still just not enough in general?
I think that it's still not enough, mostly because this goes back to Texas's policies again. So let's say a student gets tested at the testing center. If their test results take weeks to come back, that shows like that in that time they could easily infect thousands of students, right? Let's say there's a spike on campus and now we only have 10 University Village apartments. Those apartments are most likely going to get filled up depending on how many students come back to campus, right? So it's really just a matter of like how many students come back to campus, what is the risk? And it's because we have all these different flaws in the ways that test delivery is coming back. We don't have enough contact tracers, that even if UT took every single possible precaution, Texas's policies, or the way that Texas has been handling this crisis, would still not be enough to ensure that campus is 100% safe.
Gotcha.
I really loved your opening line, Snifta. Could you read it for us and maybe talk a little bit more, like you were mentioning this in what you were just saying, the like frustration with no matter what UTD is doing, we can't remove ourselves from the context of our state.
Yeah, so the first line was, everything is bigger in Texas, from our unbridled Texas pride and vast expanses of land to our unwavering commitment to setting record single-day highs for coronavirus cases. And I think that in Texas, we have a lot of this Texas pride, and I think ultimately it predisposes us to thinking more individualistically. You know, we've seen how politicized mask wearing has become. We think about, like, the government can't make us do this. The government, they cannot sort of infringe upon these individual rights and freedoms that we have, right? The problem with that sort of individualistic mindset, that when it comes to like a pandemic, is that we need to be thinking more about our community members. We need to be thinking about what happens if we don't take the necessary precautions, whether you're going to a grocery store and not wearing masks. And I definitely see people who are just not taking this pandemic seriously at all because it doesn't affect them, because they haven't seen family members become affected by it. But the fact of the matter is that cases in Texas have gone to about 8,000 every single day, and that we have to go away from this like individualistic pride and sort of thinking individualistically to thinking more like collectivistically, like thinking more about our community members.
All right. Just one last question for you. So if you have any physical classes, so they're coming out with modalities as they go. If you have any classes listed as a physical class that you have to show up in person, are you showing up, or you just drop that class?
So this is in reference to someone who maybe has chosen in-person classes?
No, I'm asking you.
Oh, me?
Because nobody knows what the classes are yet. So
Yeah.
if you have any classes that you've already signed up for and they come out and they say, hey, it's an in-person class, do you go to that class or you just drop it?
I think that for the fall semester, I'd drop it because I'm not willing to take the risk. I am most likely going to be home, like with my family. Like I do not think that UTD has made a lot of great strides and trying to assure students that campus is going to be safe, making sure that students are sitting like 6 feet apart in classrooms, making sure that large classroom spaces are reserved for those classes that are going to be in person. So that's why I'm really glad that they offer like an in-person and online class option. But if there was supposedly a class that would provide like a in-person option, I don't think I would take that, mostly because that if something were to happen, I don't think I can rely on our state's leadership to make sure that we are protected, or like I would be able to be notified if I was sick fast enough, especially with the recent surge in cases.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Snipta, for sitting down, talking with us, talking about your opinions. Coming on up, it's just going to be us two, me and Patricia, talking about Patricia's latest piece about international graduates. Stay tuned. Stick around. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Mercury Morning News. We don't have any other writers sitting here for this block of the show because the writer she's been here the whole time. It's Patricia. And we're going to be talking about her story, talking about international graduates from UT Dallas, the struggles they've been facing in the declining job market, and how they're kind of handling the situation. So I guess number one, how is it for them right now, for the sources that you interviewed and in general from working on the story? How is the situation for international students?
Great question. The short answer is really, really poorly. I had an interview and one of the sources said, I've been going through hell. It was hard for me to wrap my head around just how challenging and frustrating it is for these international students right now. So my article specifically is looking at graduate students who just graduated in May and are now currently looking for a job. And most of these graduate students are choosing to stay in the United States through this program that lets them land a job and stay here for 12 extra months on their student visa, which is a really great deal because they get work experience, which complements their education. It's great for the United States because we have broader, diverse ideas. But the problem is that you only have 90 days after you graduate to land a job. And COVID is making it much more challenging to find jobs. So some of the sources that I was talking to had a job lined up and it got taken away, had a job lined up, and now there's a hiring freeze, or now they're like explicitly not hiring international students because there is some extra paperwork that goes into hiring them. And for these students that graduated in May, they have until about August to land a job, or else they'll have to change their student visa.
So I guess, that really sucks. But what are the options that lay open to international students right now? I guess what's the rock and the hard place? Where are we at?
So the ideal situation is that they find a job. So some of the sources that I was talking to are just applying day in, day out. They live on LinkedIn, are constantly trying to connect with people and find resources. So that's definitely the goal. Stay in the United States, get a good job, get some cool experience, and stay here for a year longer. Mm-hmm. Another option is if they don't find a job within the 90 days, they can stay in the United States, but they have to give up their student visa. So then they would only be staying as a visitor. And if they're staying as a visitor, then they can't get a job. So if they choose to stay, they're really only staying in the United States for like the joys of the United States. They're not staying for any like economic or like job opportunities. Students could also enroll in a new certificate or degree program. So some sources that I talk to are considering another graduate degree, which comes at a huge financial burden, but that is like an option for students where they could extend their stay in the United States through like almost like a new student visa. And then the other option is if they can't find a job, they don't want to stay here and not work because expenses are already piling up, then they'll probably go to their home country.
I see. And so I guess so for some of these students, they might say, all right, I'll just keep being a student. We're going to go into a graduate program. So how does financial aid work for them? You know, they're not from the US, they're not filing a FAFSA, they don't got an SSN. So how does that even work? So how does
Yeah,
financial aid work for them?
financial aid is really tricky. This piece is sort of in response to a piece that I wrote last cycle that was specifically about financial problems international students were having, and I was super surprised to find that like things like the CARES Act don't extend to international students, which kind of makes sense because it's coming from taxpayer dollars, but it just really goes to show that in so many ways international students are kind of like glossed over and like looked past, which is sad because UTD has such a vibrant and active international population. So yeah, if you're an international student, you're not applying for FAFSA. You also can't get any federal loans. So you can get private loans and you can get loans through your home country, but there's just more obstacles in financing your education. And a lot of international students, if they're coming into the United States to get a graduate degree, they're coming and taking considerable loans for their education, much in the same way that, you know, UTD domestic students are doing. But it just makes and compounds their situation and makes it even more dire because now, you know, they're trying to decide, does it make sense financially for me to stick around in the United States, enter another degree plan, take out a bunch of loans, get more debt with the hopes that I land a great US job? Or should I go back to my home country where maybe the economy isn't as strong, but at least I'll stop accumulating debt? It's a tricky question.
I see. And so I guess how much debt can you really accumulate? I mean, everybody that's in college, we can kind of think about how much money is probably being spent, but how, the loans are obviously different. They're probably going to be at higher interest rates and probably be less forgiving than a lot of the federal or domestic loans. So do you know how high these debt counts can really get for students that have just come here on a loan, they went through the undergrad on a loan, and now they're about to go into a graduate program on a loan or something like that? Have any ballpark numbers you can throw around?
I don't have any really good ballpark numbers. I had one source who said that he was currently $60,000 in debt and he was considering entering another degree program. So, you know, also taking on more debt to do that just to stay in the United States because he thought it would be worthwhile for the, you know, opportunities in the job market once COVID passes. Yeah, I don't have any super specifics on that though.
All right. And hey, how did you find the sources to interview? If I recall, you interviewed an international graduate, but you also interviewed an immigration attorney.
Yes. So actually all of my sources for this article were connected to the article that I wrote the last cycle. I very quickly learned that even though international students make up such a large part of UTD, I very rarely interact with them. So actually writing this story was super eye-opening for me in many ways. But I interviewed an immigration lawyer who is friends with a UTD alumni that was an international student that I interviewed for my last story. And then the two international students that I contacted were like friends of friends of the last article. And it really made me appreciate how connected their community was because really they're all struggling. You know, only 2% of our international students returned home when COVID hit. So most of them are still here as opposed to most domestic students are back home now. So it's a like very tight-knit community. I feel like now that I, know these small pieces, I'm sort of seeing how things are moving together. But for a long time, like I really had no contact or any connection to the international community.
Mm-hmm. And so why can't some of these international students go back home while you're digging around? What did you find?
Yeah, so some chose not to go home. They were like, I think COVID's going to blow over. Some people choose not to go home because maybe their healthcare in their home country is not as strong as in the United States and they feel safer here.
Well, that's something to say.
Yeah. I think also there's like a financial question, because if you go home, like back in March, it was a question of like, am I going to come back here in 1 month, in 2 months? Now it's looking more and more like maybe this is a long-term thing that we're settling into. But I even talked to one international student who said that there were no flights that he could find at all, which maybe that's changed now, but like some countries really do not want people from the United States entering right now because we have so much COVID.
Absolutely fair. Well, that's Patricia Matthew for you, my current co-host. And when we get back, we're going to be talking to Nandika about the polling process and how we get surveys and figure out what the community of UT Dallas is thinking. Stick around for the Mercury Morning News.
Do you want to start by introducing yourself? So telling us how long you've been writing for the Mercury, what your major is. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm Nandika Mansenka. I've been writing for the Mercury for about a semester now. And my major is neuroscience. But I really love journalism, and it's always been something that I've done as sort of like a hobby. And yeah, the Mercury's been really fun so far. So yeah.
All right, so for this piece, Nandika was actually making a survey, which we generally make ourselves at the Mercury, and so she was working on figuring out about concerns about student enrollment in the fall, and we're just going to ask some questions about how that went. So how did the polling process go? Were there any trolls, and what were kind of questions that you were asking on the poll?
So in the beginning, it was a little slow just because it was hard to sort of get the survey out there. And in the beginning, we weren't really getting that many responses, but then we posted it on Reddit. And we got a lot more responses from there because people were very vocal about how they felt about fall and stuff like that. In terms of the questions that we asked, it was mainly just whether people are inclined to stay enrolled for fall semester, or if they are planning on taking a gap semester or taking community college classes or doing something that's not affiliated with UTD, just because maybe they had different motivations for fall in terms of how UTD was going through with the coronavirus and the process with that and stuff like that. So it was basically just a gauge of what students' thought processes were and whether they would be back for fall or not.
Yeah, I feel you. So how many responses did we get in general?
We got around 315 responses.
315 responses. Okay.
I'm curious, in your article, you mentioned that 9% of students, only 9% said that they would be willing to stay enrolled in UTD if everything was online. And when I read that, I just find that hard to believe, because like we're such a large campus, and I picture students, even if they were frustrated, if that was the decision that UTD made, people would still be coming to classes. So I'm curious if you take these surveys at face value, or if you sort of have to look at them with some sort of skepticism, like you talked about posting it on Reddit. Do you ever, I don't know, like put some scrutiny on that and say, maybe I'm only getting the loudest or angriest voices?
100%. I mean, Reddit especially, it's definitely the UT Dallas Reddit is very polarized in terms of the sort of things that people say on there. And it's definitely a lot of the more, I guess, inflammatory responses that are the people that are answering the survey are more of the people that, they're very polarized in terms of what they think they should be doing. But I wouldn't say this poll is 100% accurate, just because a lot of people are simply choosing what their tentative plans are. So it's definitely not set in stone 100% that they're not going to come back or stuff like that. But you definitely have to take stuff like this with a grain of salt, but I think it definitely is a representation of people's plans.
And hey,
go ahead, Ben.
Was the poll sent anywhere else? Like, was it basically just sent to word of mouth and Reddit?
Yeah, so before I got this survey sent to me, actually, it was sent by another Mercury reporter to a bunch of different places, but she wasn't garnering as many responses, and so we decided to put it on Reddit. But in the beginning, it was definitely word of mouth. There was no other mode of sending the survey out. So
no Twitter, no Facebook.
I think we sent it out on other social media after I got the story, but before that, word of mouth. Yeah.
Interesting.
Something that I really love about your story is you start with this survey, which you just acknowledged that, you know, sometimes surveys, they're like good for getting a feeler, but maybe not like totally describing the situation. And then you also have these two really great interviews with students who are kind of on opposite sides in terms of what they're thinking about for the fall. Can you walk us through a little bit more about what those two sources said?
Mm-hmm. So the first source I interviewed, his primary motivation for heavily considering a gap semester or community college and not staying enrolled at UTD was mainly that he didn't enjoy UTD's online format when we tried it out during the spring. And the decision on his part wasn't only because of a dislike of online learning, it was also the financial aspect, having to pay full tuition and not getting like a full college experience in return. So he was unwilling to, I guess, pay the regular fees in exchange for limited access to facilities and stuff like that on campus. But he did say that he was expecting that the UTD online format would probably improve for fall since they've had time to sort of figure it out and they've been through the summer online courses and stuff like that. So he was hopeful that the UTD online format for fall would definitely be an improvement, but he's still the financial aspect is sort of what drove him towards a gap semester. For my second source, his main motivation to stay enrolled and do online through UTD was that he was planning on taking some higher level courses since he's a junior now, and a lot of those courses weren't offered at community college, so there was sort of no option in terms of that. And he also said that just in general, UTD online would be a good option for him because he didn't like the idea of having to wear a mask 5 to 6 hours a day, and he said that as opposed to being mask free in the comfort of your own home, there's definitely pros and cons to that, but he chose to stay at home. And as for not taking a gap semester and staying at UTD, he said he was aware that a gap semester would not be productive for him and would just be delaying his plans. And so that was sort of their two distinct thought processes.
All right, I see. And how did you find the student interviews, anyways?
It was through Reddit.
Where did you find them from? It was just through Reddit?
I was emailing a bunch of people and asking if people knew anybody in person and through word of mouth who they could refer me to. But a lot of the people that I talked to, the people that they were considering, or like the people that they knew that were considering gap semesters, they were still very tentative about it. So on Reddit, there were a lot of people that were quite positive of what they were doing in fall. And so I thought they would be better sources just because they had a concrete idea of what their plans would be. So, yeah.
And man, interviews and COVID times, it's driven us to Reddit.
I know.
There it is.
Exactly. I'm curious because UTD has made some vague statements about their plans for the fall, but there's still a lot of questions that people have and there's a lack of specifics. What do you think you're going to be keeping an eye on as this story sort of continues to unfold before us?
I think what I'd probably be keeping an eye on is just, I guess, what UTD is planning to do, because I know they announced that they're going to have like different modes of learning, so they could have a hybrid like thing where people are doing online and in person. They could have just online. So if those options are available, those distinct options are available, if people who are planning on unenrolling for fall semester, if they will stay enrolled just because UTD is not planning on going just completely online. So if the distinct options would sort of change people's minds. So
All right.
that's kind of where I'm planning on going with this. But for my sources, the one that I talked to who was sure about the gap semester, he said that even regardless of like if UTD changes something in their how they carry out fall, he probably will still take a gap semester just because he started planning for that already. So, yeah.
All right. Well, that's about the time we've got for this segment. When we come back, we'll be talking to one Jonathan Stewart about some interesting musical news, especially about the recent projects coming from the China Club project. You're going to want to stick around. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Mercury Morning News. And now, we're not actually talking about the Mercury. We're talking about some music news coming from the lyrical, wonderful, melodical world of music. And so, interesting things that have been happening. Recently, there were the Libera Awards. It's a music award show that celebrates the movements and successes of various independent artists and labels. They're streamed on June 18th. FKA Twigs won Video of the Year for her song Cellophane, and Big Thief won Album of the Year for UFOF 4AD. Tinariwen, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, Willa Bamba, Danny Brown, Ways Blood, and others also took home awards that night. The full list of awards and winners can be found on the Libera Awards website, and album reviews for a lot of those winners can also be found on the Radio UTD blog if you want a student take on the album before hopping right into it yourself. And Orville Peck, who won the Libera Awards categories of Best Breakout Artist and Best Country Album, chose to delay the release of his new EP, Show Pony, until August. It was originally set to be released on June 12th. Orville made the decision to push the release to put more of his focus into the Black Lives Matter movement. As stated by him on Twitter, the momentum is currently so strong and it needs to keep going in order to dismantle the injustices of oppression. So if your voice hasn't been heard yet, just use it or walk out and hear the protesters. And if you're scared, tell them Orville sent you. Till then, fans can take this time to educate themselves on Black history and country music and current Black artists in the genre. An example you can check out is Evil, who's a guest on Orville Peck's Instagram account on Juneteenth to talk about the impact Black people have had in country music, talking about their experiences as well as sharing playlists, facts, and articles. And if you missed those resources, don't even sweat, as the entire day of Instagram stories was archived by Orville on his Instagram account. And finally, today, in terms of new music releases, Radio UTD alumni Cameron Black made a new album under his China Club project on June 19th. This album was called Ming and Chi Chi. It contains works from 2015 to 2019 featuring other musicians such as Michael Briggs, James Edward Naylor, and Yvette Cologne. I don't know how to pronounce it. To be fair, the primary narrative of Ming and Chi Chi surrounds protests and the plight of Hong Kong and Black people in America through Cameron's perspective. And all funds made from this album were donated towards the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and Color of Change. Quoting my man Jonathan here, in China Club's world, people travel at warp speed. You find love and it's gone. You find sustainable peace and it vanishes. Ideas begin to expand through bit-crushed tape-saturated MIDI, and then they're kneecapped for stepping out of line. It's loud, it's noisy, non-stop, and vibrant. So tell me, Jonathan, what made you feel this way? from this album?
It's, this album is very experimental, something that the electronic genre needs right now for sure. A lot of the time, there's a lack of humanity when it comes to electronic music, where you lose a human touch, a human quality, and I feel that Cameron really put his whole heart into all of these different tracks.
Yeah, for sure. I know I was just listening to the album in preparation for the show, and I was listening to some of these tracks, and I know what you're getting at, because these tracks are really out there, and they're really jiving. And I was listening to CC, and I could definitely see why you might say it was your favorite track on the band count. Why do you think CC was the best track on the album?
I find that the longer tracks, Cameron's able to expand upon some of his ideas and go through some different loops and he jumps quick. Like I said, he doesn't stay anywhere very long. But when he sits down and really expands upon an idea, you go on a journey, and he leads you through. And you know, you, I didn't necessarily get the political draw that he was going for in the narrative, but I definitely get the video game aspect of starting the game over and having to play it again, and you die at the end of the tape and you have to restart.
I'm curious about this like lore, and specifically like just the lack of lyrics and sort of like maybe not necessarily understanding the context or the inspiration for it. I chuckle when I read the end of your piece where Cameron wrote this really long response to you where he's really picking apart some of his inspiration, and you respond, wow. Can you sort of like summarize more for like our audience what the inspiration for these pieces were, and now that you've had maybe some more time to sort of sit with that and re-listen to it, what do you now take away from these songs?
Sure. Yeah. I thought about cropping out that wow, because that was just my first reaction. Was it was such a potent thing, the way that Cameron really sort of applied both the Chinese protests that are going on and the Black Lives Matter movement, both that he feels that he's a part of in some way, spiritually in some form. But so I definitely took away from the album that there's definitely a struggle happening, and you sort of get that from both the song titles, which I believe the last one is Try Again. So the very last track is Try Again. So it makes you think of, you're at an arcade machine and you die to the final boss, and you have to insert your credits and boot everything back up and start from the beginning. But I find that to be really beautiful, and to be able to express that feeling even without the song title, you can vaguely feel it. The song title helps, but certainly to express that with very few lyrics. There's only one track that has lyrics on it, which I find is track number 6 is one of the most digestible tracks. It doesn't necessarily push the narrative along, but it is a very beautiful track in my opinion.
All right. Hey, and who would you recommend this album to? And who do you think might like it, and who do you think might not like it so much?
Sure. Yeah, I think anyone who is interested in something new for sure would enjoy this album from China Club. I think that if you're into like traditional sort of electronic, you might not be really into it because it's not going to be your typical, I guess, one and two drum and bass type music. What I'll say is that if you really like breakbeat, if you really like footwork, you're going to get a lot of that. Even if you like jazz, there's a lot of interesting, there's even like a cool sax solo at the end of Ming, which is one of the most, it's very beautiful.
All right. Well, hey, thank you very much for sitting with us, Jonathan. Really appreciate you coming on. And that's going to be it for the music news of the hour. All right, everybody. Welcome back. It's the end of this first kind of rebooted episode of the Mercury Morning News. What did you think today, Patricia, of all the pieces?
Yeah, I loved getting to pick the brains of the reporters, because so often we only sort of like read the headline, and read the article, and we don't get to see the process behind it. So I enjoyed hearing some of the like anecdotes that don't necessarily come out in the story, and also some of the passion and ideas that reporters have to hold back for journalistic integrity, but sort of getting to pick at them and, see what they're thinking. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, finding out these details and just kind of going over all sorts of crazy stuff. For example, 24% of your tuition, it's being paid to cheapskates like me. Hey, appreciate it. All right. Did you so we at this time you would have just listened to the music news segment. Did you get a chance to listen to the album at all?
Yeah, I listened to pieces of it before, especially the ones that he recommended in his article. Mm-hmm. I'm not very into experimental or like that far experimental music, so I feel like it was a good foray for me into it. But I'm glad that Jonathan was here, because him and like everyone at UTD Radio, I feel like really knows their music and really helps and like guides me through it.
And hey, if you, the listener at home, want Radio UTD to guide you to, you can come over to radioutd.com. Follow them at Radio UTD on Twitter, Instagram, maybe Facebook. I'm not sure anymore. But you can also check out, of course, the Mercury website, utdmercury.com. That's where a lot of our summer stuff lives nowadays. And thank you very much for coming by and listening to the Mercury Morning News. Next time, we'll have some more people on talking about the next upcoming stories, latest news from the Mercury. It's going to be a good time. So thanks for listening.
And really, this just scratched the surface. Like, there's so many other stories that we published this cycle, and you can like read the actual articles that we're discussing online, as well as tons more. We have all of our archives on there. Yeah, but in 3 weeks' time, we'll be back with another Mercury Morning News to sort of walk through the headlines and see the process that goes into making these stories.
And so that'll be it. Have a good day and have a good morning, everybody.